All right. Just an introduction. Yeah. Who are you? What do you do? And what's your connection to Mount Pleasant?
Okay. My name is Rev Cokelia Dunn. I was not born in Mount Pleasant. I was born in Bryn Mawr, but I was raised in Mount Pleasant. My family, the Olivers, moved to Mount Pleasant in 1952, I believe. So I was about 5 at that time. And that's where we stayed until we all went off to school or craziness. I'm currently back at First Baptist Church, my home church. I had pastored 10 years. I was called to pastor another Baptist church, First Baptist Church of Marple, in 2003. And I stepped down in 2010 as from the pastorate there and took up the pastorate at SEI Chester, the Protestant church there. Currently, I am the facility chaplain at George W. Hill Correctional Facility, the only chaplain, as a matter of fact. That facility, which is Delaware County Prison, houses 1,883 inmates on a good day. On a bad day, they house over 2,000.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, that's a lot.
A lot of folk.
Yeah.
Most of it is drug related. We do have a youthful offenders pod, and those young folk are under the age of 18. And recently we had 2 who were 14 years of age. And the reason why they're at George W. is because they're being charged with adult crimes, including murder, etc., etc., etc.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. A little different than what we used to grow up with in the neighborhood.
I bet. So, your time at you said you didn't originally live in Mount Pleasant. You moved there.
We moved there when I was 5.
How was that like?
It was like a rural town. Down here off of Upper Gulf and Radnor Road was Hobson's Farm, and they raised Black Angus cows. You know where those $1 million houses are over there on the corner? And the ones down off of Croton Road, you know where the $1 million houses are before you come down over the bridge? There used to be a farm there as well. I don't know who owned it, but they raised Black Angus cattle there. You know where they built those really brand new $1 million houses right there. So moved here then, next door neighbor raised hogs, not pigs. Yeah. And they slaughtered them. Across the street, Mr. Bird, who was Barbara's father, and her husband's grandfather, so what would that make him?
Father-in-law?
No.
Grandfather-in-law.
Grandfather-in-law, yeah. He and Mr. Land had a business, trash business, and they owned quite a few houses in the neighborhood. Where we lived, the family that used to live there moved from Mount Pleasant into Philadelphia. They were the Harrises. So when we moved there, I was 5. My 2 younger sisters were not in existence or thought of. And it was just my older sister and myself. And we belonged to First Baptist Church from that time. My parents joined there. Not too long afterwards, they had really belonged to Saints Memorial in Bryn Mawr, which you know is on Warner Avenue in Bryn Mawr. That's where they belonged to when they lived in Bryn Mawr, and then we moved to Mount Pleasant.
Do you currently live there?
No, sir. I have not lived in Mount Pleasant since the 70s. I'm trying to think. It's been a while. Since maybe the early 70s, maybe 72, somewhere around there. I lived there basically until I started work at GE. At the time, they were on the hill where Lockheed Martin is now. In 1967, excuse me. 1967, I graduated from high school, Conestoga, in 65. I went to Pierce, which is now Pierce College. I went to Pierce Junior College. And so you know what happens when you go away to college, you never go home, technically. And so probably I had not lived in Mount Pleasant since 1972. My parents were there until they died. Mm-hmm. So I would say I haven't lived there since maybe the early 70s, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm.
Did you enjoy living there?
It was a good community.
Mm-hmm.
That was the time when people minded everybody's business, but it was a good thing because you never had to worry about your kids. You never had to worry about, leaving your door open. The bond bread man used to bring the bread. My mother did day work, and he would come in the house, pick up the check to pay for the food, for the bread, give her the change, leave it on the table, close the door, go out. Same thing with the milkman who delivered milk. So you didn't have to worry about folk coming in, breaking in your house or anything like that. Number one, that kind of neighborhood is kind of hard to do because everybody knows everybody. Anybody strange, who are you? And so they knew a lot about each other. They knew whose family they were and things like that. It was a lot safer than it is now. Right now, I don't know about you, I don't leave my house open for anybody. Not even the door to look in and see what you got. Because, that's the world we're living in at this moment. Mm-hmm.
What does Mount Pleasant mean to you?
It's home. Yeah. When we talk about home, that's why it was called First Wayne, my home church. It's the same thing. No matter where I go, First Baptist Church Wayne will be my home church. When I left the pastor, when I talked about my church in Wayne, well, my home church. So where I was raised in Wayne. I wasn't raised in Wayne, at Bryn Mawr, I was raised in Wayne, where we had to learn how to play baseball with the guys, we had to play football with the guys. This is where we learned how to drive. You couldn't drive a stick in Mount Pleasant, you couldn't drive. Stick on the column, not on the floor. We used to drag race on Upper Gulf Road. Yes, you could not do that now. Would not advise it. But we used to do drag racing up there. So you learned an appreciation for cars. And of course, when I was growing up, I don't remember much when I was real little because I remember my mother's talking about there used to be a bus that used to come up Upper Gulf Road. But when I go old enough to know about buses, and I don't remember it coming through. It may have, but I don't remember. So it's always been a place where you had to learn how to drive or you couldn't get anywhere. We did a lot of walking, or at least I did. To go into Wayne, you would have to walk because there was no public transportation to get you there. So you walked to the movies. When I was growing up, Anthony Wayne had segregated movie theater. Clearview was segregated.
Wow.
Yeah, see, they don't tell you that stuff, but it was. The guys that we grew up with were a few years older than us, and so, when we went, it had changed somewhat, but they had divided areas for black and white at Anthony Wayne Theater.
How did you feel with that, back then?
At the time, we were kind of isolated from everything, but as you grew up, you began to understand that there was a difference between you and some of the other folk. One of the things that we were told by our parents and those who were in the neighborhood, for instance, where the business is now, what is that business next door to First Wayne? That was the school building in the Mount Pleasant area. I forget what they call it now, right next door to the church. That was a school building, and that's where everybody went to school until they built Stratford School. When they built Stratford School, they were trying to have all the black kids go to school at that school that was next door to the church. Until Miss Hall and a couple of others, Maisie Hall, fought the school board and insisted that we be included with the kids at Stratford School. So this was 52 when I was 5, so this would be 57, 58. When they fought for allowing us to stay or to go to Stratford School probably took place before I went to kindergarten at Stratford. I started at Stratford School and kindergarten.
Like the height of the civil rights movement and everything.
Well,
around it.
It was at the beginning of what took place in the South, but it wasn't so noticeable here because people didn't pay it much attention. But it happened here at the same time in the same manner that it happened in the South, where we were not allowed to go places. I started working at GE Aerospace in 1967. They were throwing out the applications for black employees in 1967.
What?
Yeah. You see, this stuff that you think that happened back in the day is, it took place, and it took the NAACP in Norristown. Reverend Thomas Parker at the time was president, to confront GE Aerospace.
So you're part of two distinct histories.
Yeah, exactly. So GE was not always, nice people, good company to work for, but they had issues. So that's what they were doing at that time. And so no matter what you had, to allow you to work, you could still face, discrimination. The field in which the plaza was first built in 1967 or thereabouts, that's when they really started building the plaza. It was a cornfield that had been, the owners of that cornfield was a black family that lived in Berwyn. And they fought for years to retain it. And they could not retain their property. Somebody decided that, they could do some stuff they should not have done and took the property from the folk who originally owned it. So we don't have a nice history in this area where everybody was treated well or fairly. I don't remember when, I think my sister, I think you talked to Peggy, I think they had a lawsuit during the time she was in high school, and that's when it came down that they were not going to be able to retain that property. They lost it. Yeah. So.
Possibly switching gears, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it might tie in. Do you have a favorite memory about this area, maybe specifically Mount Pleasant?
About the area, I liked it when we were kids growing up. I mean, drag racing, that was the most dangerous thing we did. It was fun. We used to have dances at what used to be the community center where the ball field is now. We used to be able to play adult baseball back on that field until, by some twist of interesting fate, they turned it into a Little League field, which is rather interesting. But we used to be able to play adult baseball on that field, where the guys would hit the ball way out there. Where they leveled it now, because it used to be a hill, we used to sled on that hill. And what is that road behind that field? If you go down Fletcher Road and you make that left-hand turn, I forget the name of the street.
You're just talking about
there are houses right there, but it used to be a hill that dropped down into that, in that area. So we used to sled on that hill. That's when we really had snow. Now we don't have it anymore till this year or the year before, a couple of years ago. That's how much snow we used to have all the time. But we enjoyed it because you could walk up and down the street and not have anybody mess with you except for the dogs. You didn't have to worry about the craziness that's going on today. Although the neighborhood was rather insulated from reality. In a lot of cases, unless you ventured out, you weren't touched by anything, until you went away to school, until you started work. Then you discovered, there's some real strange stuff going on up in here,
So you talked about the smallness of the Mount Pleasant community. Did you like that, or?
It never bothered me. There was no need for me. Like most folk, I lived in North Philly for a year when I was 21, 22 years old. Really crazy. A definite switch from Mount Pleasant, But by that experience, you learn how the real world lives. And as long as you held on to your basic training, because I was a PK, preacher's kid, you always wanted to do what everybody else had the opportunity to do, so you lost your mind for a few years, but you always maintained that base of sense where you wouldn't go but so far. And you found out the area where you really wanted to go wasn't as great as you thought it was. That where you were raised was probably pretty cool.
I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mount Pleasant today, but the student renters that live there, do you think they should be totally included into the community, or there should be a separate, they should not be allowed to be in there, and it should be just Mount Pleasant people only?
Personal opinion?
Absolutely.
When I lived in Bryn Mawr, we lived on Brook Street when I was grown, and I had a house on Brook Street around the corner from my grandparents, which were mostly housed by, most of the houses in that area are housing Villanova students who have no class. They don't know how to live in community. On Brook, actually Miller, was one block street. You could only park on one side, and every house didn't have a driveway. But they would park all over the place, so that people who worked couldn't get the place to park, which was not fair. You don't live there all year round, so, and then they would have crazy stuff going on in the community. This is an older community, this is a family community. And I think they took advantage of the fact that they could go and do whatever they wanted to do, unless people spoke up, which some of us did. And now, if you go on Brook Street, both of them, Brook and Miller, are permit parking only. Because those of us who lived there felt that, wonderful you're going to college, but I live here every day, and you're taking advantage of the neighborhood, and you shouldn't. And so we confronted the township commissioners, continued to push them to make that change, and they finally did. In the same manner in Mount Pleasant, because the housing, those who are investment housing, they can buy up the property real cheap and undercut, anybody who wants to buy it. They now turn it into student housing who don't know how to live in community. And since you don't know how to live in a community where the people are not like you, look like you, or act like you, doesn't mean they don't have the same intellect, you don't know where they came from, you kind of tear up property and you're insulting the community because you're gone. After you've torn up the people's property, you don't care. You're going back to wherever you're going, and you've left the house in this disarray. You disrespected the old people who were living next door to you because you just didn't care. That's disrespectful to the community. The community has a right to live, to be the way that they are, because they are community. They live there all year round. You have to watch your kids now, because they're flying up and down the street. It used to be, one of the men in the communities is dead at this moment. He would come out. Who do you think you are? And confront folk, which you have to do, otherwise people will tear up your property. Because they have no respect for the property. I don't think they should be there. I don't think they should have rental property like that. Family, living, fine. But student housing, no. Because they don't respect the community in which they live. Most of them, and I'm generalizing. But they don't. We don't have, if you live next door to people, you don't hear them. It's because they're quiet. So if you go in and have a loud party and do all kinds of things like they did in Bryn Mawr, some of the stuff they did was not for for a community. You have kids in the neighborhood, and here you got guys running out the house naked and all this stuff because they're having a party, throwing beer cans and all over the place. So that means you don't respect the neighborhood, you don't respect people who have children, who don't want their children around your stuff. And so that's offensive. I think if people are going to rent to students, then they have to check and make, like have the list of rules and regulations. If you can't be mindful of the community, then you can't stay here. The moment we find out you're not mindful, you're out. When I lived in La Maison, where the apartments are, in Devon, behind, we used to call them Sugartown Mews, but it's called something else. Braxton, where Braxton's animal...
I think, is that past the McDonald's?
Yeah, just past McDonald's, where...
That giant plaza?
Yeah, where Kmart is, and...
Okay, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? There's apartments called La Maison in Radnor Township.
Mm-hmm.
I remember living in those apartments when my son was in high school, and I remember the people next door were college students, and they had a wild party one night, and the neighbors called the next day, but they were gone. They put them out. And that's what should happen in neighborhoods where folk don't act the way the neighbors should. If you don't respect the neighborhood, you gotta go. There's
Makes
no
sense.
like, let's negotiate. Nah, you're out. Because we told you when you came in, we didn't want it. Everybody who lives in it should respect those who are already there. They've been there a bit. So you should respect that neighborhood.
This seems like I'm going in a different direction,
It's
but
okay.
I think this is a fantastic question.
Mhm.
Do you remember any stories that your parents told you that just stand out?
Not really. Of course, we were there in the old church before the one that we are in right now was there. Going to that church when I was 4 or 5 years old. The building is no longer there, but we do have the picture of it in the background of when the cornerstone was laid on the church we're in, of Dr. Sullivan, Leon Sullivan, if you remember who he is, or was. Was there at the dedication of our church when it was built. But that old church had iron stove, a potbelly stove that heated, and a big iron kitchen stove in the kitchen. I remember that. I remember the men in the community getting together to build the community center that's no longer there. Where they all put labor into building that place that's no longer there. No evidence of it being ever there. Some things that when we grew up, in that generation, children did not sit in on adult conversation. And that way you could respect grown folk when they lost their minds. You never knew that they lost it. But today, kids hear all kinds of stuff, so that way they can talk to Miss So-and-so any kind of way and call her Helen instead of calling her Miss Jones. You know what I mean? Because you sat at the table where parents now talk about grown folk, and you go back and say the same thing to them. So we didn't spend a whole lot of time sharing stuff, with our parents would say to us anything about what was going on, other than, of course, during the Civil Rights Movement, they would talk about what we weren't supposed to be doing, whether we should boycott, why, we would hear those conversations about boycotting certain businesses and things like that. We heard about those things from our parents and, at home and things like that. But I don't remember offhand any. That's why I was saying earlier, Joy would probably recount just about everything.
You probably have seen what Mount Pleasant looks like now.
Yeah.
What do you think should be done to make it back to where, I'm sorry, I'm not wording this right, to restore it back to where it was when it was...
The hominess, the friendliness of the people. There's nothing you can do right now because we're a society of people who mind our own business and don't mind anybody else's, so we're not as neighborly as we used to be. But I think the respect needs to be returned to the community. There used to be a time when you wouldn't find trash and stuff on the church property. People were respectful of folk who went to church. People were respectful of the people in the church and what positions they held. Now we don't have respect for the building nor the people. It would be good if we could go back to that kind of thing. Because the good old days aren't necessarily the good old days, because they kept us as a people restricted from what we could do as far as jobs and education are concerned. We had to fight for a whole lot of stuff, which makes it very difficult to hear things the way that they're changing and trying to keep people from voting. When just in 1965 the Voting Rights Act was passed. How long ago was that? And now we're back to square one. You may not have to count the jelly beans, in a jelly bean jar, or you might not be able to have to recite the preamble of the Constitution, but they're still doing crazy stuff, creating issues where there aren't any issues around voting to keep folk from voting, changing the districts that you're in to vote so that you eliminate putting black congressmen or people in leadership in, because we've changed that now, keep you from out of the way. Those kinds of things that we had gained in the 60s are now being eaten away. I think that we need to have a better, stop thinking that because we have a black president then things have changed. Because if you can call the president of the United States a liar and think you're okay, we have not gone very far at all. If you can hold up the progress of the country because you don't like the man who happens to be the president, and you thought that he was going to lose the election, so you hold up and mistreat people, we haven't gone too far. We're still where we are, and those things that we thought we'd overcome, we have not overcome them. They're just hidden below the surface 8 years ago. Now they're really coming back. This is the way it really is. So I think we can't go back to the good old days. We ought to be moving forward and stop allowing people to take back what we had. So, it took us a long time to win some stuff and make our communities and our lives better. We're allowing them to take them away, because I think sometimes we have our heads stuck in the sand. It's good to get an education, we ought to, but that doesn't mean people's hearts have changed, and that's the issue.
All right, I had one. Oh my gosh. Did you have any outstanding experiences that were unpleasant that had to do with race?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, it sticks in my mind forever, I think, because I'm an advanced age now, so still forever, right? I think I was about 14. And not necessarily connected with the neighborhood, but because we were isolated, or maybe because I grew up isolated, I don't know. I remember our church took a bus trip to Bowling Green, Virginia, to be in service with another church. And I remember having to go to the bathroom. Now that was before they had the bathrooms on the bus, And I couldn't figure out why we couldn't stop so that I could go to the bathroom and anybody else. And my mother would never tell me why we couldn't stop to go to the bathroom. You see, because we were isolated, we went to Conestoga, I was in TE then, that was before it became the middle school, it was the junior high, 13, something like that. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't go until they finally got, I forget where it was, where I could go to the bathroom. And it wasn't until a few years later that I figured out by myself why that would be. That stays with me forever. I've never forgotten it. Or I used to be a babysitter, in the community with white families and things like that, while I was in high school. And I had a little boy that I was babysitting for. He got upset with me because I wouldn't let him do something. He says, "You're black." And I said, "No kidding." Really? But, it was his way of, trying to put me down. Mm-hmm. So where did he learn that from? You see. And so that kind of shapes how you look at life if you let it. But we're still living in that kind of society that feels comfortable about doing stuff like that. I mean, what's going on in Ferguson that happened to us when we were here? We used to drag race up here on the street. I raised my son, as we used to call it, drive while black. If you're driving and a police officer stops you, put your hands on the wheel, say nothing. Let him shine the light in the automobile. Don't make any sudden moves. Say yes, sir, no, sir. He asked for license and registration, saying, excuse me, I'm going to turn on the dome light. I'm going to reach into the glove box, because that's where my registration form is. Okay? Because I told him, I can get you out of jail. I can't get you out of being dead. It has not changed. It has not changed. And that's not good.
Really isn't.
It's not good.
Yeah, it is still a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually quite sad that it is.
It is. I mean, even here, if you rode down the street here and you got stopped by a police officer, I would be concerned about him stopping me. Even me. And it's sad.
Oh, my turn?
Okay.
Give me like 2 in a row.
What?
You did. Because of the era that you grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the racial biases that were there, predominantly
Mm-hmm.
there, and now you're kind of hidden under the surface, what do you think the legacy of the neighborhoods that you've lived in
Mm-hmm.
is in regards to all of these different milestones for civil rights?
What's the legacy?
What's the legacy?
As far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
for this generation, they got to get to stepping. Because the milestones that we had laid and had been established are being torn down. You know, where you might be able to get an education now, you still have to be able to get a job. And we're still dealing with racism in the workplace. You know, I work at the county jail, Delaware County Jail, where you think, you know, everybody's equal. No, that's not true. Okay? In our criminal justice system, Lady Justice sees what color you are, how much money you have. Okay? As a matter of fact, whether you're female or male, in most places, instances, most poor folk, whether they black or white, can't get a lawyer. Right? So if you can't get a lawyer, you're going to have to suck up whatever deal the public defender tells you to suck up. It's still unequal because most people don't have the money for a private attorney. Okay? I think the one thing that stays in my mind is, as far as criminal justice is concerned, is the OJ case. I have no idea whether he committed the crime or not. It really doesn't matter. But I think the reason why the Caucasian folk had a problem with it is because he had enough money to get the attorneys that they normally get. So he was able to get off for what they thought he was guilty of. I don't know whether he was guilty or not. If you talk about remembrances, I remember being at work and having people go into the conference room, turn on the TV in the conference room, waiting on the verdict. And when it was not guilty, I thought they were going to turn the conference room out. They wanted to know, aren't you going to come? I said, why? Why am I going to watch somebody suffering? That's not something for me to watch, you know? And then when he was not convicted, everybody thought it was a travesty of justice. But it happens all the time on the other side of the fence. Mm-hmm. So why should it be a shock? He just happened to have the money to have the defense that most people ought to have when you have these serious crimes, and was able to get away. If he didn't do it. If he did, he kind of got back in the position where he's there now. That doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, that happens often.
Something I was always curious about
Mm-hmm.
was, I know things have changed since the 60s, obviously. Well, intricacies.
Y'all got to hear music that you say anything you want to say.
Yeah.
And we kind of had it hidden, you kind of, didn't say everything.
You kind of had to know the language.
Yeah, you knew the language and it was implied so you could get it, but you didn't have to say it.
But do you think that because that's another racism topic, someone, I wouldn't go as far as to say someone like Malcolm X, someone not like Martin Luther King Jr., but someone maybe right in the middle nowadays would be able to make a difference? Or do you think the days of sit-ins and not riots, but
Marches,
and peaceful
demonstrations? No, you can see it needs to be done. We have to go back to the 60s. We have a black president who is very well qualified. Man is very bright. But yet, you can feel you can disrespect him, not you. But how do you feel you can disrespect him? And he's the president. I don't think anybody can recall in history where a president was ever insulted to his face and expected not to say anything. I would probably say never. And some of our presidents have done some stuff. Nixon.
I was just going to say.
I mean, okay. Did they ever call him a liar to his face? Never. Did they ever? No, never. What does it say to you? This country has not gone as far as they think they've gone because you still have this underlying and now outward racism, but nobody ever wants to call it what it is. Oh, it's not racism. We just think that his politics are wrong. No. Some of this is really racist. And some of the things that they say, it is. You would never say that in closed rooms and stuff like that, just us conversations. You would never do it on national TV. But people feel free to do it because now we've come so far away from the ideals and the marches and the things that we did in the 60s to make a change that we need to go back. The Voting Rights Act refused to allow some of the southern states who had those crazy laws in order for you to register to vote to continue to do it. Now they're trying to, reverse it. Now it's okay for you to act crazy. So now they want you to take a photo ID because we have voting fraud. How much voting fraud have you seen? Come on, give me a break. You can't prove that. We had the issue in Florida, but that wasn't because too many black folk voted or too many Hispanic folk voted. There were some issues with the voting machine, the hanging shads and all that other kind of crazy stuff. That should have been taken care of because when the election was done, we knew that, when it came out, the stuff was wrong. But that didn't have anything to do with racism. That had to do with the fact that they wanted that person in to win. So they decided to cheat. But was that addressed? No. So now we want everybody to have a photo ID, and you can't have one because you're college-age student. College-age folk usually have a mind of their own. They can, go one way or the other, so we can't have them vote because they got some new ideas, and they're dangerous. So don't have them vote because that's what happened in 2008. Y'all went to vote with the way you think and most college students think and change the world. No, we can't have that happen. We got to change it because somebody must have cheated. So we got to go back to marching. What happened in Ferguson can happen anywhere. We have to go back to boycotting. We actually have to make sure that they don't change the Voting Rights Act and not allow them to change the districts so that we can have more black representation in Congress. They've changed it so that no matter if the majority of that community is African American or Hispanic, they've changed it. So now you've lessened that. So now there won't be an African American or Hispanic in Congress to upset our apple cart. We want the things to remain the same so that people at the top can stay at the top. They can do whatever they want to do. I mean, they talk about, when they talk about President Obama, they're always talking about he's pitting races. I mean, not races, but what's the term I want? The rich against the poor and vice versa. What's that?
The haves and have-nots.
Yeah, that kind of thing. That's not true. The haves don't want to pay their fair share. I'm middle class, I think. I'm getting tired of you taxing every penny I have. You think of a new tax? Oh, they don't have to pay for it. You know, inheritance tax. If your parents leave you a little bit of cash on the side, right, and they're not multimillionaires, you got to pay in Pennsylvania. I think you have to pay 6.5%. Millionaires don't pay what you pay, what we pay. They pay 4.5%. How's that? Right? They have taxable, non-taxable stuff you'll never be able to get. So all of your money is taxable. Why is that? Because they have no intentions of being taxed fairly. You know? One of the things we have to march against is the fact that they're sending jobs overseas. Where y'all gonna work? You got all this education. Where you going? Why should you be working in McDonald's unless you own it? If you have a college degree, you ought to be able to get a job in the field that you've paid big time money, or your parents have paid big time money for you to get. Right? Why is your job going overseas so they can pay folk overseas $5 when they need to pay you a living wage?
Exactly.
And they're not sharing that money. Yeah, you know, they're not sharing it with anybody. So we need to march for that. That we are no longer going to allow you to have jobs that you send overseas so you can make money that you don't get taxed on. I mean, you can do what you want, but you ought to pay tax on it. You know? We've cut the food stamps. I was in the store about a year or so ago in line over at Acme, behind a lady who was buying milk and bread and eggs and, you know, cereal and, you know, food, just food products mostly she had in her basket. She had a couple of little kids in line. She was in front of me. And when the clerk ran it up, it was more than what she had to pay. And so she started taking stuff out of her basket, you know, putting it back, you know, in the line to take the money off the book, you know, so she could pay for it. And then she was paying with they have the cards now with, if you're on WIC and, you know, that's, you know, any of those social programs and whatever. So she was taking it out of her basket, and I told her, and I'm not saying it just because it's on here, but it's upset me, that she was taking bread and stuff she needed for her kids, milk, and out of the basket because she couldn't afford to pay for it. Well, if you paid a living wage, no one would have to be on welfare that y'all hate, you know. They hate welfare. So if you hate it, give them the training, give them the education, and allow them to get jobs so that they can have a living wage so you don't have to worry about them being on that. It would be an emergency basis only. Where somebody lost their job, you might fill in. Somebody got sick for a couple of years and need to fill in, and then everybody's able to work. That's not right. You know, where she would have to take food that she needed to eat, feed her children with, out of the basket because she couldn't afford to pay for it. We are the richest country in the world, regardless of how lopsided sometimes we are. But we oughtn't to have people who are starving and going hungry because some people don't want to share. We need to march. I think we need to march in reference to immigration. I teach Bible study and Christian reentry at SEI Chester. And I asked one of them, because they were talking about what the immigration issue. And I said, which one of you is natural to the United States? Really? What's your heritage? Oh, my parents are from Scotland. You're not natural to here. You were an immigrant. Your family. The only people who this country, you know, is natural to are the Native Americans. So why are you against immigrants? Everybody is an immigrant. Some of us came when we didn't want to come, you know. So how are you going to not want immigrants to be a part of where we just came from? Yeah, we need to march. We need to march. We got some issues that need to be addressed.
Talking about Obama, in our class we actually read his book, Dreams of My Father. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But something that like really impacted me from his book is that he said he needed a race just like he needed a father. And I just wanted to get if you've read it or if you've heard of it, like, what is your opinion? Do you feel like
I understand what he's saying. You need to be a base. You need who you are is what tells you where you need to go and the value you have. If your race is put down and you are identifying with that race, you're either going to identify with the negative or make it a positive. Because without knowing your race, you don't know who you are. We have, I think it was on the 2010 census where they changed to other.
Yeah.
Right? If you're other, what base are you rising from? What history does other have? You don't have a history. If I'm African American, I know where my foundation is in Africa somewhere. But because of the circumstances of the slavery times where they refused to allow those who were from the same tribe to mix, that way you couldn't communicate, I don't know my history, a lot of it. Some of it I know because of some of our oral history in our particular family and some things that we have found out ourselves. But most of us don't know where we came from. So our identity is with Africa because we know, obviously, that probably is where we came from. But without that springboard, how can you be anybody? Back in the 60s, before then, we were called Negroes, right? But in the 60s, it would change. We were being called, and we called ourselves blacks. Why? Because Negroes was a negative term. And so in the 60s, when James Brown and the Radicals, the Black Panther Party, and Malcolm X, and all of those people started building a value in who we are as a people, we became black because it's a good thing. James Brown said, "I'm black and I'm proud." That said, I'm black, it's okay, it's a good thing, instead of it being negative. One of the things, if you talk about, I just thought of it as something very poignant that I remember from my childhood. As a matter of fact, I have the evidence on it on my dresser now, and when I look at it, I now understand why I did what I did. We used to do in school, you did the clay figurines and stuff when you were in elementary school, and you would color them and stuff. I have a white angel that I made. I think I was in first or second grade or something like that. Because if you remember, there was a study a few years ago in reference to black children. What is your interpretation of beauty? And since we were always told, black being negative, our impression of beauty was white. So my angel is white. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, wow.
And so when you want to know why people want to be other, it's because being black is negative. It's a bad thing. Our interracial couples, if you're married to a black person, be they fit male or female, that child should be raised as black. Why? If you raise a child who's interracial, as we call them, but have a black parent or white and a white parent, whichever side, if they don't initially know and be proud of their black heritage, you'll mess them up when they become adults. As they grow from teen years, when you start getting crazy anyway, 12 or 13, we wish you hadn't been born, send them back. Who told me I could be a parent because I can't stand this kid? That is crucial because they need to know they have value. If you raise them as other, they have no value to look back on. Because our black heritage says that we were kings and queens. Cleopatra did not look like Elizabeth Taylor. Sorry. Okay? If you really want to get right down to it, Tarahaka, who was the most powerful general in the ancient world, coming out of Egypt, he was an Egyptian pharaoh, warrior out of Egypt. He's in the Bible in the Old Testament, was a black man. Okay? But did you know that? See?
I'm pretty good with history too, and I
But
just never
go
mentioned.
take a look at where did he come from. If you read your books on history of the Bible, it will tell you. Exactly. Where was Jesus born? Right? In Israel? What did they look like?
They're not white.
They didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to go into Egypt and hide. You'd be thinking, oh Lord, what is this? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He would be an oddity. You see? So if you don't know who you are and the value your people that you came from, you will never be able to be who you need to be. You've got to have a race base. So I understand what he's saying. He's proud of who he is. I'm sorry other people aren't, but he is. So why should that offend people? Why don't you want to be black? Why? Because it's been a negative thing. And it's not. In the ancient times, Carthage, you've had ancient history.
Yeah.
What was Carthage?
The slave trade.
No, it was that too. But that's where everybody went to get an education. Where was Carthage? In Africa.
Right above Libya, right? Or right next to it, I think.
Come on.
Close.
Right. So what color would they be? Come on, y'all. Okay. Who is Hannibal? Came across the mountains on an elephant and conquered the world. The New World. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't everybody know that? Because it's not being taught. So if you don't teach history that is all inclusive, the people who need to know that they have value will never know that they have value. You know, the shoes that you have on, right?
They're kind of dirty, sorry.
Got my combat boots on.
Yep. The soles,
Mm-hmm.
they stay on, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think created that? It was a black man.
Mm-hmm.
The stoplights that we hate, that we go through,
Oh yeah, I knew that.
you knew that one?
That's really important.
Yeah.
Personally, my favorite. It's gonna sound totally
Uh-huh.
condescending, but it really is my personal favorite. George Washington Carver.
Yeah,
Peanut butter is like the greatest thing ever.
exactly. But
So-
look what he did with it.
Exactly. It's incredible.
Exactly. You know,